Hi guys, it's Alan and welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. And today guys, I am going to be reviewing, boom, Senlin Ascends. And by reviewing, I mean giving very, very, very high praise to what is probably my new favorite book. Guys, I love this book. I picked this book up originally because I had started seeing it on a lot of underrated fantasy book lists when I was Googling other books to add to my Goodreads, and I liked the cover. I liked the fact that where it takes place is called the Tower of Babel, and so I bought it in a book haul, and when I was trying to decide my TBR, I let my wife choose one, and she read all the backs, and she thought that this one sounded the best to her, and so I put that in my TBR, and I am so glad that I read this book, guys. So good! I love this book so much. And I'm gonna tell you why, but I'm also gonna tell you why you may not love this book. I can easily see how someone could not end up loving this book, especially as much as I love this book. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So, Senlin Ascends, the first book of the Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. The premise of Senlin Ascends is super easy, and I'm not gonna have to spend 10 minutes talking about what the book's about like I do when I review the Malazan books, because there's really just one plot thread. Senlin and his new wife Maria, they are from a small fishing village, and Senlin has heard about and has been talking about the Tower of Babel and has been studying kind of the Tower of Babel from afar. He is a headmaster of a school, and so he always teaches his students about the Tower of Babel, and so it was his dream to, when they got married, that they could take their honeymoon at the Tower of Babel. And so the book opens with them on their train arriving at the Tower of Babel, and right there at the beginning, he gets separated from his wife, Maria, and so the whole book is him trying to find his wife. Simple premise. Senlin is in this foreign tower, this foreign world, doesn't really understand how it works, and he's trying desperately to find his wife. So simple premise there. So guys, Senlin Ascends, one of the reasons I like it so much is it's different than any other book I've read, certainly recently, but also really, really familiar in ways. It feels a lot like a cross between Hitchhiker's Guide, Alice in Wonderland, The Phantom Toll Booth, Narnia, Discworld, and a Dickens novel. It feels like all of that like smashed into one. In fact, Senlin feels a lot like Arthur Dent from Hitchhiker's Guide. He carries around and has studied just religiously the Everyman's Guide to the Tower, where it's just like a tourist manual of what you should expect when you go to see the tower. And so he clutches that. That's like his Bible for there. So it's similar to the Hitchhiker's Guide. And one chapter of that we see at the beginning of a chapter even talks about how one of the indispensable tools of a traveler to the tower is a pocket square because it's multi-use, and that reminds me of the towel needed in Hitchhiker's Guide. But it's just all of those things combined. There's this really foreign, dreamlike quality to everything that's going on, to where even when I was reading it, I wasn't certain that it was all really happening. So it was very crossing into the new world of Narnia and being at just all these drastically different bizarro worlds with bizarro characters that kind of accompany him for one section of the tower, like Alice in Wonderland. And then dry British kind of abstract humor of Discworld while still feeling like a gas lamp fantasy. It's not quite steampunk, but there are airships and there's some clockwork stuff, and they do light gas lamps. Senlin notes that electricity is rare, but existing, so that it gives it a very Dickens feel as well. Another reason that I really, really fell in love with this book are the characters, especially the characters of Thomas Senlin, who's our lead, and his wife, Maria. We lose Maria at the very beginning of the book. That's just on the back of the book. That's not a spoiler. It happens in the first chapter. But Senlin is this headmaster of the only school in his little fishing village, and he's just kind of uptight and, you know, kind of thinks he's a little better than the tourists. He thinks he knows better because he's educated. He's more educated than kind of anyone in his village. And so he has that kind of snootiness and also obstinacy where he has a difficult time changing his mind and learning from the things that are happening to him because he just continues to think he knows better. But he's also not really good at socializing, and he's not good at talking to new people or being in new situations. And his relationship with his wife, because Maria is vanished in the first chapter of the book, his relationship with her is told exclusively through flashbacks, where we see how he, who was about 10 years older than his wife, ended up meeting her, and how someone so kind of free-spirited and playful and adventurous and kind of full of wanting new experiences could end up with someone as kind of stodgy as Senlin. It talks about how Senlin has trouble at like the dances that the city would have because he always found a fireplace to stand near because no one would bother you while you're stoking a fireplace because he didn't really want to engage in small talk and talk to people like that. And his wife loves playing the piano, and everyone loved her and wanted her to play the piano all the time. So I love these characters because I really identify with Senlin and with Maria. I'm a lot like Senlin. I'm a teacher, and, you know, a lot of times I think I know better and I don't. And I, too, at large gatherings where I don't know a ton of people, will try to find my fireplace and just kind of be left alone. I don't like large gatherings. I've always brought a book. In fact, just this week, I have family in town, and my dad invited me and my wife to come kayaking with like my brother and his family, and then my aunt and uncle and my dad. And he's like, you can't bring a book on a kayak. Didn't even say anything. He just knew that I was going to try to bring a book, which is true because you can always find time to read. But having Asperger's, I find it really difficult to connect with people over things that just aren't interesting. But I'm getting off on a tangent. My wife is much more like Maria, where she just has just this sense of adventure and is playful and is constantly like, you know, when I'm on the times that I get stuffy or kind of closed off. She has this really easygoing way of kind of breaking through that. And she's the nicest person that I've ever met, and really the nicest person that anybody that I know has ever met. Ask anybody and they'll tell you that my wife is the nicest person that they know. And so I identify just right off the bat with Senlin's struggles with having lost his wife. And this is his new wife. And my wife and I have been married less than a year. So not as new as Senlin and Maria, who are on their honeymoon, but I get it. And I identify with Senlin's struggle and his desire to do nothing but find her. Just from the very beginning, when Bancroft introduces Senlin and Maria, it just perfectly encapsulates their two personalities, just right at the beginning of the book. Now, what really makes this book great, despite such a simple premise, is that the Tower does not agree with Senlin's decision to try to find his wife. In fact, the Tower, just like the real Tower of Babel, is the epitome of human pride and corruption and injustice. That is what the Tower is and what the Tower stands for. And so the character work in this story is so fantastic from where we start with stuffy Senlin, who's also older. He's in his 30s, which is also refreshing for a main character in a fantasy book. He's not a young kid. So you see this older academic kind of intellectual who's set in his ways, and a lot of the themes of this book are about the way we see the world and feel that the world should be and how we think the world is, grappling with the reality of how the world really is. And this is what Senlin struggles with, is he has his whole life read these tour guides and studied the Tower of Babel and been fascinated by the mysteries of who built it and why was it built and what's its purpose. But he quickly finds out that these guides in no way portray the tower as it actually is. And watching Senlin just initially stubbornly refuse to accept that things are not as he demands that they should be, as he feels that he has the right for reality to be, is just really, really good character work. Seeing where Senlin is at the beginning of the book versus where he is at the end is just such a great evidence of character growth. And I also relate to Senlin because the Tower is injustice personified. Senlin, while understanding that, just can't accept his powerlessness in it. In fact, some of the lowest points that Senlin gets is because he feels so impotent and so powerless in the face of just this monolithic symbol of injustice, and he can't do anything about it. And I feel that way a lot of times as a teacher, where I do not get to make policy in the district. I don't make policy for my school, I don't make policy for my district, and so I too have to accept decisions made for me and for my students that do not benefit either me or my students. And that powerlessness, I think all of you watching this or having read this book, I think we can all identify with Senlin here and relate to that feeling of powerlessness that we have no control over, and being forced to deal with the world as it is, not as it ought to be. He can't accept that what has benefited him so much in his fishing village, where he's kind of risen to prominence, his patience and his stubbornness and his logic and reasonability, his reasonableness. He doesn't understand why these are not virtues in the tower, but the tower just laughs at poor little Senlin. His virtues are so in contrast to the tower's vices. But those stuffy characters aren't always the most interesting to follow or watch. And so Bancroft does a really bang-up job during those times where Senlin does feel things, especially concerning his wife. At the beginning, you're wondering, why would this beautiful younger woman end up being with this stuffy guy who seems to kind of be like, dousing her flame? But those flashbacks really show that Maria really loves Senlin, and that Senlin really loves his wife, despite his inability to kind of show emotion. And so we do see his emotion when he thinks about his wife. And so there is some action in this book, especially toward the end. This is very much a book about journeying through new lands and kind of a character study, which is so wildly different than what I usually read, which are, political fantasies or military fantasies. There's war and a siege in almost every book that I read, but not this one. But Senlin's main struggle, which is refusing to bend to what the tower wants him to be. Everyone tells him there are no friends in the tower. Trust no one. Everyone is garbage. Look out for yourself. Senlin refuses to accept that, despite his evidence to the contrary, and he's determined that someone is gonna be his friend. He's gonna trust people, despite the fact that the tower and Senlin's own experience is rife with betrayal. And that's what kind of makes this book hard to read at times, is if you've ever experienced like a really big betrayal. These are not people at war, or, mages or wizards or warriors, knights, all of these people who are really in the thick of things, who expect that they could die really on a daily basis. That kind of betrayal you expect, and is different than just really human betrayal. And so you're just like, Senlin, oh. And so sometimes it is hard to read because it hits a little closer to home than, say, an army being betrayed, which happens all the time in the books that I read. It is not just Senlin who's a great character. Bancroft's side characters, the people that Senlin encounters along the way, are really, really good, three-dimensional, have their own motivations, and there's kind of this theme around everyone on what will everyone do to look after theirs, to protect their own. What are they gonna do, and how far will they go, and what will they allow to stand in their way when it comes to protecting those close to them? And even some of the most despotic characters that he meets still kind of have that undercurrent of protecting what's important to them. So these characters are really good. I especially like the character of Edith, one of the female characters he meets kind of early on. I really like her. I can't really say a ton about her character because I don't want to give spoilers for this, but Edith, I love Edith. She's definitely my favorite aside from Senlin. And it's not just Bancroft's characters that are really great in this book. The world itself, the Tower of Babel, is such an interesting idea. Each level of the Tower of Babel is known as a ringdom, and each one of these ringdoms is drastically different than the one preceding it. And so what at first seems like these bizarre different ideas just kind of thrown together. It's like if you've ever played a JRPG, you're gonna go to the land you're gonna go to the fire level, and then you're gonna go to the ice land, and then you're probably gonna go to some island place or some place in the mountains, and each Each different town that you go to is going to be just drastically different. It seems a little bit like that with the basement's pretty normal, and then the bizarreness of the parlor, what's that about? And then the baths has its kind of own attractions, and then you have level 4 New Babel, and what at first seems just kind of a random like, oh, wouldn't it be neat because I can try this on this level? It all comes back to the mystery of the tower, and there is a method to Bancroft's madness. There's a reason that everything is the way it is. And so I really enjoyed that as well, because even though he's not roaming around a fantasy countryside, the tower provides that kind of differentness that is one of the reasons that we all like fantasy. The last praise I want to give this book before I start talking about the things that, because it's not a perfect book, but the last thing I want to really gush about is Bancroft's prose. Guys, this is one of the most beautifully written books that I've read in a long time. And it just feels weird to say beautifully written because that's just not me as a person. But his prose perfectly matches the kind of book that this is. It reads like a classic, like a Jane Austen or a Dickens, without being overly wordy. So it removes that overly wordy prose while still just having that kind of classical feel. In fact, the prose feels just as stuffy as Senlin is. It feels the exact amount of stuffiness and kind of like, I say, that Senlin, that's so indicative of Senlin's personality that it just perfectly matches the tone of the rest of the book. I wish that I could write the way Bancroft does. I think he's a brilliant writer. In fact, I've seen reviews of people for whom this was not the right book, but they still, just based on the writing, gave it a better review than they normally would have, just because his writing is that good, guys. Check it out, if nothing else than to see and to envy how good of a writer he is. So I don't really have any complaints about this book, but I will say that some of the events of the story, especially in the last third of the book, rely very, very heavily on coincidence. And that's pretty obvious. There's some stuff later on that's really strongly telegraphed also. But even though you kind of see something coming, and even though some of the stuff relies on coincidence, the result of that is just so gripping and exciting, and you're sitting on the edge of your seat, like, because everyone is suspect. So you're just like, will this go off? I say a lot when I review the Malazan books that Steven Erikson leaves a lot of things purposely vague because he wants the reveal to be a big deal, but it's so vague that you can't really even kind of predict what's coming. I think Bancroft here is the exact opposite, that even though some stuff is telegraphed, and even though it relies a little bit on coincidence, even though we know some of the plans that are in motion, the excitement comes from trying to see, will the plans go off? Because Bancroft has created this world that is so treacherous and that things happen that you just don't expect them to. Because he laid that groundwork, we are still anxious to see whether or not the plan is actually going to work, because he's laid that groundwork where plans can fail. And so even at the end, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? One other just kind of concern that I have is this is a 4-book series, and Senlin had so much growth from who he was to who he's become, that I'm just kind of concerned in the next 3 books where Senlin has to go from where he is. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because Bancroft has given me no reason to doubt him, but I'm hoping that the character work is still as good in the last 3 books, the 4th one doesn't even come out till next April, as it was in this book. I will definitely be reading the 2nd book in August. It'll be in my August TBR. I still have some stuff to work on for my July TBR, and I'm trying not to go off the rails. In conclusion, guys, I loved this book. I loved everything about this book. The middle section, when he's on the 3rd level of the tower, because this book only covers the first 4 levels of the tower, the middle section does drag a little bit, mostly because you don't really know where it's going. Later on, once you find out what the purpose was, makes it worth it. So it can drag a little bit, and I can also understand if you are accustomed to like military fantasy, action-packed fantasy, and you want battles and excitement on every page, which I also love, I can definitely understand how this book would not be for you. On the King Finn approval system, I give this book a superb plus, absolutely. It wasn't perfect, so I'm not going to give it the rare sought-after superb plus plus, but superb plus, 100% a 5-star book in my opinion. I would recommend this to everyone because even though everyone won't like this book, I definitely think that everyone who likes fantasy should read this book, especially those of us who read fantasy and also want to write fantasy as well, just to see Bancroft's prose. I think it's great. I think this book is fantastic. I know that there are others in the booktube community that I've talked to who are also wanting to read this book. I know that a lot of people have heard of this book, but so few have actually read it. So I hope that this is your encouragement, that you go out and read it. I always feel kind of bad giving something such glowing praise, and if someone hears this review and then goes and reads it and doesn't think of it the way I do, I'd feel kind of bad. It's like with the movie Your Name, which I really loved, and me and my buddies, the first time we watched it, 3 grown men weeping. And every time I recommend it, I just sing its praises and give it such effusive praise, and I let them borrow it, and I'm like, you will definitely weep. And they always come back and they're like, yeah, I guess. I didn't cry. That always happens, but I always feel kind of bad because I think I built it up too much. But I'm hoping I'm not building Senlin Ascends up too much for you. I hope that you will go pick it up. If you've read it, please have a conversation with me about the comments. I want to talk about this book all day, really. If you've read the other books, let me know how they compare, but don't give me spoilers, please, please, please. Because I'm definitely going to try to read Arm of the Sphinx in August and then read The Hod King in September. So in the next 2 months, I can just be caught up and be ready in April for The Fall of Babel, which is the 4th book, which I can finally have something on these tag videos to say, I'm looking forward to a book coming out, because I'm not super good on new releases. Anyway, guys, that is my review of Senlin Ascends. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like stuff on my channel, like and subscribe. And as always, guys, I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.